Welcome to Season 3 of the Changing Earth podcast with Sara F. Hathaway, blending survival fiction and fact to bring you entertaining education that will help you dream, survive, and thrive. And now, here's your host, Sara F. Hathaway.
Hello and welcome to the Changing Earth podcast. So we have this chapter, we have one more chapter, and we are done with the Walls of Freedom. Exciting time. My favorite chapters are always at the end, of course. Well, that's not always true. I have some favorites that definitely dot the middle as well. So it's just kind of but the end's always good. And then Battle for the South will be here. That first podcast will air in 2 weeks from now on December 5th. So Battle for the South, here we go. For those of you on YouTube, there is the book. I just got this one in. Of course, I have to order proof copies and stuff to make sure that it's, all ready to go. So I'm excited about that. Got it in, did more formatting on that one than I've done on my past books, and it really turned out cool. So I gotta say, I'm really, really stoked about it, and it's available for pre-sale right now. You can go out and pre-order the ebook on Amazon, and I really hope that all of you get out there and do that, because it really helps out my Amazon numbers, honestly. But, that's how we keep the author fed. So get out there, pre-order it, and then the print edition will be right behind it. And honestly, the audiobook will be right behind it as well for all of you out there that are just dying to get the audiobook, which I know a lot of you are. You always hit me up for them. So I got that taken care of really early as well. It takes me a while to edit that audio. So it will be close behind it, but I have to work through all the editing first. So that's how that's all going. Excited about it. So last week, Vince and Erica arrived at the capital city. They got this new experience of seeing what the capital looks like, and pretty cool little system. I think I worked out with the bowls and the ball bearings so that the earthquakes couldn't rupture it. We'll see how it works out in the future, but I thought it was a pretty cool little idea. So they arrived there. This week, they're obviously going to the federal governing board meeting, and we're going to see how that all works out. So I don't know if you've noticed, but in my book, I used a 3-party system. I have 3 parties actively, going for election and everything in my book. And one of the reasons why I did this is because I'm really not pleased with the 2-party system. And here to talk to us today about the dangers of the 2-party system is David Shestokas. So we'll go ahead and introduce him. He was on the show talking about the Constitution, wealth of information. This guy knows his stuff, and he really just wants to educate America on what the founding fathers had in mind, what their principles were. And, it's stuff we need to return to, because that's what kept us all together. That's what allows freedom to be there, is these values and being able to have your say in it through your representative, because we are a republic. But it works if it's put together correctly and people have a high moral value. So when the morals slip, that's kind of what we get left with. And that's why people go, well, we'll take care of you then. We'll make sure you're safe. We'll take care of you. So anyway, I want to go on ranting about it. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into chapter 42 of the Walls of Freedom story.
Chapter 42. They cautiously left the hotel. There were 6 more guards at the door to add to their 4 to escort them across the bold city. Erica felt more and more like a prisoner being taken to trial rather than a landowner being welcomed back to civilization. Crowds began to form and watch them go by, cheering or jeering, and the guards closed in tightly around them. Master Sergeant Bennett stood tall and proud behind them. He was freshly shaven and smelled of freshly applied cologne. Erica held Vince's hand, her heart pounding. Vince looked at Erica. The bruises on her face were now turning yellow and green, and the mark above her eye was still healing. She had just gotten her stitches out 2 days ago. When they reached the transport station at the top of the bowl, Erica gasped. From here you could see all 7 bowls that composed the city, stretching far out to the walls on the horizon. They all surrounded the gigantic glass dome. Looking through the glass, Erica realized it was actually a huge stadium where all capital city events were held, including the central meetings. It was gigantic and must have taken some kind of effort to build. She entered the transport station with Vince and the guards, assuming they were headed for a train that would take them around the bowl. She was surprised when Master Sergeant Bennett opened a door that led to internal stairs. The stairs entered the belly of the beast, traversing the area between the earth and the bowl of the massive stadium. She could see the gigantic ball bearings protecting the concrete structure. She felt a chill run up her back, walking through the eerie silence of the cold, dark chasm of the stadium. They entered through a door at the bottom into a large room. When they were given the signal, they exited the room into a hallway that led them out into the bottom of the stadium. Holy shit! I was not ready for this, Sergeant, Erica admitted, squeezing Vince's hand. She looked up at the rows and rows of people filling the seats. There were thousands of them, and the stadium was sectioned the same as the northern one, with a clear division between the landowners and the refugees. They sat in chairs positioned by the door they had just come out. The commanding delegates were announced one by one and received cheers from the audience. The northern region was represented by the two Social Safety Party members that had presided over the northern meeting, Grayson Webb and Elena Porter. The Appalachian region was represented by Social Safety official Barrett Salazar and the only Constitutionalist Party representative, Foster Jacobson. The southern region was represented by Ashton Kelly, a Social Safety official, and Caden Johnson, a Congressional Party member. The western region was represented by two more Social Safety representatives, Paxton Turner and Isaiah Haynes. The central region delegates were announced last, and the crowd roared intensely as they entered. Philip Cannon from the Social Safety Party and Calum England from the Congressional Party came out, smiling and waving to the crowd. The other party members who sat on the sub-board came out next and were not individually introduced. Erica recognized Gwen Farley, the delegate she had met in the library. Then the FEMA board members were introduced. Erica recognized Edison Carver from the northern region. A much younger man with a thin face named Marvin Foster was the Appalachian manager. Then Erica's heart stopped as they introduced the southern manager. It was Matthew Tweed. She watched his chubby body approach, and he pushed his glasses onto his face as he glared down at Erica. She hardly comprehended the words of the announcer introducing the western manager, Corrine Tillman. Her attention was stolen as the crowd erupted, cheering for the leader of the Central FEMA region, retired Colonel Nicholas Henderson. He was a charismatic, older-looking gentleman. His skin was smooth as his demeanor. The final two people to be announced were General Lawson Mays of the Federal Forces and General Dwayne McClintock of the Mercenary Forces. Erica had never seen General McClintock, and he surprised her. She had expected someone strong and muscular like Master Sergeant Bennett. The general was a big man, but rounder and nerdier looking. Like the last meeting they were involved with, they waited for the council to finish debating issues that had been brought to the council's attention, tax quotas and quarterly resource allocations. The next order of business is the situation involving Vince and Erica Moore. Will you please step forward? The Central FEMA manager, Nicholas Henderson, stated. Here we go, Erica whispered to Vince, but he was glaring at Matthew Tweed. They walked forward to an elevated platform and ascended the stairs. Erica sat down with Vince at a large wooden table with two microphones sticking out of it. Master Sergeant Bennett planted his feet firmly behind them. Let's review the specifics of your case, shall we? Nicholas questioned. Sure, Vince spoke into the microphone. You were captured at the western border, fleeing California, correct? We have the date here as November following the Great Quake. Is that correct? He asked. Yes, Vince answered. Did you go willingly with the soldiers? Nicholas asked. Yes, Vince answered. Our horses and my wife's dog were taken from us at that point, and we were taken to Las Vegas, Vince elaborated. The crowd reacted with a steady mumble. Please just answer my questions, Mr. Moore, Nicholas corrected. Who was the camp coordinator at that time? The camp did not have an assigned manager at that point. We were held at gunpoint at an airport while the soldiers fought back with the surrounding citizens and added them to the people inside the gates. The city was in shambles, and the refugees were put to work building additional walls and shanties to house them, Vince explained. The crowd erupted in debate over what this landowner was declaring. Mr. Moore, please only answer the questions or I will have you arrested and removed. Nicholas glared at him. Do you understand, Mr. Moore? Yes, sir, Vince replied, frustrated. So that was before there was an assigned site manager, Nicholas asked. Yes, Vince answered. Was your family registered when Matthew Tweed was assigned as manager? He asked directly. Yes, Vince answered. We even had tracking chips installed in our bodies, he said loudly for all to hear. The stadium erupted in chatter. You and your wife have a hard time following directions, is that correct? Nicholas asked. May I ask you something, sir? Erica spoke up. That's highly unusual, but sure, he replied. She could hear Master Sergeant Bennett holding his breath. If we were registered at that point and my in-laws were looking for us, why were we not found and removed? The man responsible for that error is right there, she pointed at Matthew. And he just tried to have me killed a week ago. Look, Erica yelled, pointing at the gash across her head. Do you have proof of that allegation, miss? Nicholas asked while Matthew sat there smugly. The stadium erupted in more chatter and cheering. No, sir, but he has had it out for us since he was assigned as the Las Vegas camp manager, Erica contended. Your names were lost to the system mainly because you were never adopted out. We have reports of insubordination and multiple escape attempts. Is that right? He pressed. Yes, Vince replied to the roaring of the crowd. We were scared when the infertility law was passed, and we wanted to escape before our children were sterilized. That's not all you did, is it? Nicholas pressed. You organized an armed riot against federal forces in which soldiers were harmed and property was damaged. Sir, tell me, what would you do if someone came to take your children and alter them so they could no longer bear children of their own? What would you do? Vince asked directly as the crowd cheered again. I can't tell you because I've never had any children. What I can tell you is this. The laws that we live by are enforced for the greater good of all Americans. The population must be held in check if we want to survive as a race. And some people have to sacrifice. Without the laws, we would have chaos. Desperate people with no homes arming themselves against those that own the land. On the same note, we are a merciful country and feel responsible for taking care of the Americans who have lost so much. Landowners have been charged with caring for these poor souls. It is our God-given duty to feed and house them in their time of need. But we must also recognize that if everyone was allowed to breed, we would never be able to sustain the system. Nicholas preached to the roar of the lower levels. You do admit to organizing a rebellion, correct? Nicholas hushed the crowd as his voice bellowed out the speakers of the stadium. Yes, Vince said quietly. I'm sorry, sir. You'll need to speak into the microphone, Philip Cannon commented. He was a good-looking man in his late 40s with a short, trimmed beard that was just starting to gray at the bottom. Yes, Vince replied, his voice echoing through the stadium. The stadium erupted, the lower levels mostly cursing them for their actions and the upper levels cheering loudly for freedom. The generals, shifting in their chairs and whispering to men attending them, stared nervously at the crowd. General McClintock made eye contact with Erica as he talked to another man that had appeared from behind him. Even after this act of insubordination, you were given a post with Mr. Tweed's illustrious rescue squad. Is that correct? I would like Erica Moore to answer this series of questions, given that she was appointed as squad leader, Nicholas directed. Yes, sir, Erica replied. Despite your actions before your placement on this team, you have an exemplary record during your time in the rescue team, ma'am, Nicholas admitted. Thank you, sir, Erica answered. Why did you decide to join the rescue squad after your former rebellious actions against the federal forces? Nicholas queried. When we first arrived at the refugee camp, we had no idea what was going on, sir. We had our weapons, animals, and freedom totally removed from us. But we survived, and our family stayed together with our friends we had left California with. We were not concerned with adoption, so we could stay together. Then, when the infertility law passed, anger spread around the camp like a wildfire. We did what we thought was right for our loved ones. Then we were punished for our actions and spent 9 years in that camp. So when Mr. Tweed offered the position, it seemed like the only way to advance our lives to a better place. I understood my role within the squad and performed it, sir. Erica explained to the cheering of the upper levels. This next question will be directed at Matthew Tweed. During this time, you began applying for the position you now occupy. Is that correct, Mr. Tweed? Nicholas asked. Yes, sir, Matthew responded. I understand that your rescue squads were analyzed and the names of the missing landowners were matched with the name on your rescue squad members at this time. Is that correct? Nicholas pressed. Yes, sir, Matthew agreed. Mr. Tweed, why were these individuals not immediately told and removed from their post? Nicholas wondered. Erica smirked as he squirmed in his seat. He looked at her, his beady eyes calculating her reaction. He looked to Nicholas and said, Sir, as rescue squad team members, their team was already scheduled for a mission whose budget was already allocated. After the mission was completed, they were scheduled for a return to Minnesota, Matthew explained. Is it correct that these landowners were then arrested? Nicholas asked. Oh, they got him now. Erica reveled in the moment as the crowd debated reasons amongst themselves. Why was this action taken? Nicholas asked. Sir, I received word of a planned revolt that was going to take place. Then, Master Sergeant Bennett came to me and told me the Moors had an escape plan. Given their past track record, I am confident that they helped to plan the revolt that was scheduled to occur. So I had them arrested. Even as landowners, this is the protocol for protesters. You know the law, sir, Matthew attested confidently. Erica's heart sank. He was blaming the revolt the night they escaped on them. There was no way to prove they weren't involved. She shifted nervously, and Vince grabbed her hand. The crowd erupted in conversation. Nicholas settled the crowd. The riot that I was informed of did happen the next night. 5 soldiers were killed, and we lost 8 prisoners that night, 5 of which belonged to the Moore family. Matthew relished in his superior position. Erica Moore, your husband, admits that you two were involved in organizing a revolt in the past. Conveniently, your family escapes during a riot. Were you involved in the organizing of this revolt? Nicholas asked. No, sir, Erica answered. If you are not involved, then why did you escape and not turn yourselves in? How can you explain this, ma'am? Nicholas pressed. I can't, Erica said. The crowd mumbled fiercely. Erica stood up, grabbing the microphone off the table. I can't explain why the Great Quake happened. I can't explain why I was the only one to survive the devastation that took the capital city of California. I can't explain why I've been tied up so many times I now have permanent scars around my wrists, or beat up so many times I can't even stand before you today without bruises, she declared, showing off her damage. The camera focused in on her and broadcast it across the arena. And I can't tell you why the government closed the borders of California and left all those people to die. I can't even tell you why the soldiers rounded us up like cattle and housed us in conditions where we ate rats to survive. I can't tell you why our names were lost, why my children were mutilated. But I can tell you what it was like to look at a future with no possibility of freedom in sight. And I can tell you this, sir. I had nothing to do with the revolt the night we escaped. The stadium boomed like thunder, clapping as the people cheered. The refugees screamed for freedom and a return to constitutional law. The landowners sat stunned in their chairs, the truth hitting them like a frying pan across the face. Sit her down, Master Sergeant, General Mays commanded. Master Sergeant Bennett reached forward and touched her shoulder gently, urging her to sit. But there was something in the way he did it. Erica knew he was proud. The council whispered amongst themselves while the crowd roared. We will take a 15-minute recess, Nicholas declared. The delegates filed out and the people roared on. It began to quiet a little as some left for refreshments, but the halls were alight with people talking of ideas that had not been spoken of for a long time. Can you believe the nerve of that fucking jerk blaming all that stuff on us? Vince questioned. I really don't know what will happen, Vince. He was awfully convincing, Erica worried. Master Sergeant Bennett stood there, dutifully quiet. Erica knew there was a lot he wasn't telling her, but this was not the time or the place. She thought of Cole telling her the less you know, the better. He was right. If she had connected the dots before and realized that Master Sergeant Bennett had helped plan the revolt to get her out, she would have had to lie, and she was a horrible liar. After the allotted time, the delegates filed back in, this time without the introduction. We will now bring to vote the matter of the Moore family. A yea vote will maintain their landowner status and sentence them to 2 years of probation. A nay vote will strip their landowner status and place them into a prison camp for a year, after which they can re-enter the refugee system, Nicholas explained. The crowd chattered softly and then quieted to hear the votes of the delegates. Erica's heart pounded so loudly in her chest she thought the whole stadium could hear it. Her palm began to sweat and her leg wanted to tap like a roto-hammer with nervousness. We start with the northern region, Nicholas looked to Grayson Webb. Nay, he replied. Erica's eyes opened wide in horror. Yea, Elena Porter answered. Thank you, God, Erica thought. Appalachian region, Nicholas directed. Both Barrett Salazar and Foster Jacobson responded with a yea vote. The crowd cheered. All right, Erica thought, squeezing Vince's hand. Southern region, Nicholas looked their way. Yea, Ashton Kelly replied. Nay, Caden Johnson replied in a smug way. He glanced at Matthew. That's 4 yeas and 2 nays. Western region, Nicholas asked. 2 more yeas came from Paxton Turner and Isaiah Haynes. Erica's heart leapt for joy, and she saw Matthew shift in his chair. Central region, Nicholas instructed. 2 nay votes from Philip Cannon and Callum England. Erica now watched a small smile form on Matthew's face. Now the FEMA managers will vote. I'll start with a nay, Mr. Carver. Nicholas was smooth as silk. Yea, Edison Carver replied. Mr. Foster? Nicholas asked. Erica recognized the last name and hoped he wasn't related to the private Jacob Foster she had a run-in with at the refugee camp. Nay, he replied spitefully, glaring at Erica. Mr. Tweed? Nicholas asked. Nay, he seethed. That's 5 yeas to 5 nays. Nicholas shifted in his seat. The crowd erupted. To Erica's delight, most people were chanting for yea, but she still feared a possible nay. Miss Tillman, it all comes down to you, Nicholas replied. Yea, she replied, smiling at Erica gently. This family has been through enough. The crowd erupted, cheering. Matthew glared fiercely at the 2 he had let get away, the 2 that had blemished his record, the 2 that had created all these people screaming for their freedom. He burned with hatred and a stare down with Erica. Master Sergeant Bennett pulled at them from behind. Erica and Vince turned and kissed one another passionately before acquiescing to the Master Sergeant's directions. We've got to get you guys out of here, the Master Sergeant urged. She noticed that the government guards had been pulled off them and had been replaced with 4 mercenary soldiers. General Mays pulled his team and gave General McClintock full jurisdiction over your sentencing. Basically, the feds don't care if you live or die at this point. Master Sergeant Bennett was on high alert as they traversed the tunnel. Climbing the steps, they opened the door into a city erupting with unrest. People were rioting in the streets as soldiers pushed them back. There they are! Someone shouted from the crowd. Erica's heart pounded as the crowd rushed in around them. She hated large groups of people. Most were cheering, but a few rushed through the throng violently, ready to attack them to maintain their way of life. The team worked their way to the back door and exited onto the railway that was flooded with people chanting, fighting, and running into and out of the different city sections. The noise of the crowd chanting echoed in Erica's ears as they continued along the railway. Suddenly, the crowd peeled back as the sound of a helicopter drowned them out. It landed on the railway, and Master Sergeant Bennett loaded Erica and Vince up. Putting on flight helmets as they entered, the helicopter began to rise above the city. Erica watched the chaos unfold below her. The tops of the bowls began to close as the city went into lockdown. The dissidents would be rounded up and shipped off to who knows where if they managed to survive that long. She was already watching the firing squads eliminating people below her. They were flown to the Central Region gate and hovered over the top to the train station. Vince and Erica had to put on hoods pulled tight over their faces so they would not be recognized. By now, the broadcast had reached the entire country.
Erica and Vince leave with this federal probationary sentence, and riots start to erupt in the city because of the ideas they're reigniting, because of the thoughts that they're reigniting in people going,
we were a free people, and yeah, we needed to have some kind of control to get this country back online, but it's time to start thinking about the values that made us Americans before the natural disaster occurred. It's a really cool part of the story. Like I was saying in the intro, I used a 3-party system in my book just because I'm so frustrated with the 2-party system and the lack of any other person's voice to come into that system. And then once the people of power within that party have power, it's so incredibly hard to displace them. They're the ones who decide, who's going to go up for election against who. And we don't really get a choice in that, so to speak, anymore. So I'm really kind of upset with that. And that's why I wanted to do the 3-party system, not only in my book, and then I wanted to have this show on the dangers of the 2-party system. And here to talk to us about that today is David Shestokas. He did one other show so far on the Constitution. David Shestokas is an attorney licensed in Illinois and Florida and the author of Constitutional Soundbites and Creating the Declaration of Independence. David Shestokas earned his BA in Political Science from Bradley University in 1975 and his Juris Doctor from the John Marshall Law School, cum laude, in June of 1987. In 1986 to 87, he served on the John Marshall Law Review. He studied at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. So this guy knows his Constitution inside and out. Mr. Shestokas has been admitted to practice law before the Illinois Supreme Court in 1987, the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois in 1988, the Supreme Court of Florida in 2004, and the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida in 2006. He founded the law office of David Shestokas in November 1987, and he's been practicing in areas of criminal defense, corporate law, real estate, and business financing. He later served as Assistant State's Attorney for the Cook County State's Attorney Office in Chicago, Illinois from 1994 to 98. So, that's just, Dave's bio just goes on and on. He has been studying the Constitution of the United States of America, which relies heavily on the Declaration of Independence, and just, putting that all into law. So when he looked out at the world and went, oh my goodness, everybody's forgetting everything, it was his mission really to bring it back to us. So he's been all around the place. You can go ahead and check his full bio out on my website. But you can get a hold of Dave at www.shestokas.com. www.shestokas.com. And the Constitutional Soundbites book that he has out is magnificent. Great way to kind of digest what the Constitution means. And then he did Creating the Declaration of Independence right behind that to talk about all the values and everything that's in that. So he tries to bring it to you in a fun way, a way that we're going to understand and actually be able to cope with nowadays, rather than just, blah, blah, blah that you don't understand. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and welcome Dave to the show. I am back with Dave Shestokas, and we are talking about double party systems. So thank you so much, Dave, for being back with me. I really appreciate your time today.
I'm so happy to be back with you, Sarah. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
It's been a long run of these Democrats and Republicans, and I don't remember a time in my lifetime where I saw anything else. So I wanted to get into that and talk about where did this dual party system come from? How did it get so overrun?
It basically turns out to be principally the difference between what we have a presidential system compared to a parliamentary system.
Okay.
That is kind of what drives the two-party situation. But of course, we haven't always been Democrats and Republicans. We were originally Federalists.
The Whigs.
George Washington, in fact, was a Federalist, and then he was succeeded by a Federalist. But then during that period of time is when they discovered that you really couldn't wind up electing a president unless you had a large group of people together, because electing a president required a majority of the Electoral College. And it's even though we have all these local systems of government, local units of government, all the way down the line, the whole fact that the two-party system exists for the singular purpose of choosing a president.
A president.
And yeah, and that's where it came from, because of course George was originally not anything. Okay, the folks that became Federalists coalesced behind George, and then elected John Adams in the second instance. And during Adams' presidency, the opposition to Federalists, that is, folks that were consolidating and growing the central government, became at that point in time the Democratic Republicans.
Interesting.
And that was of course Thomas Jefferson, who was John Adams' vice president, and that was one of the where they discovered they'd made a mistake in drafting the Constitution, because the selection process for the presidency was that the number one electoral vote getter became president. The number two electoral vote getter became vice president. Well,
Right.
when there were no political parties and it was only George Washington and he was elected unanimously and whatnot, that was all great.
That worked.
That was all great. As soon as there was any competition, then you wind up with the person being first and the person being second actually being competitors rather than compatriots.
And
Or
we think that we're unique in that our political arguments get so raw, you know. That's a complete fallacy. We're not unique in that manner, right? They had some tear down elections back
the
then.
election of 1800 was a mess.
Right.
The election of 1800 was a mess when the vice president ran against the president.
Okay.
When Thomas Jefferson, who in fact was Adams' vice president, ran against John Adams, the sitting president, and he beat him. Actually, he didn't beat him easily, though. Jefferson actually did not get a majority of the electoral votes, and that wound up in the House of Representatives. They still had that whole other mess, and they were trying to create a situation where people would run on tickets, but they had a situation where the electors voted for two people, but they didn't designate who was president and who was vice president. It was just the first and second thing. And as it turns out, Thomas Jefferson and the guy who was supposed to be running as his second member of the ticket, Aaron Burr, tied in the Electoral College. There was an actual tie.
Right, Burr.
Yeah, Aaron Burr, who ultimately, of course, killed Alexander Hamilton, but that's a whole other story.
In the duel.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. They're very cool. You think things are bad? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Vice President ultimately killed the Secretary of the Treasury. The former Secretary of the Treasury. But at any rate, the way and it's still this provision to this day, if there's nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives votes to elect the president. And Burr and Jefferson tied in the Electoral College, and it took 35 votes of the House of Representatives before they actually selected Thomas Jefferson to be president. That's a whole other story behind it. So first of all, there was the mess between Adams and Jefferson, and then in the months following the election, there was a mess between Jefferson and Burr. Jefferson wound up with a vice president who actually had contested the election
and
in the House.
Probably didn't feel real good about him.
Wasn't very happy about that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, a number of years later, during his second term, Thomas Jefferson had Aaron Burr arrested and tried for treason. So actually we're living in pretty rational times,
right? So it's just simply the fact that we can hear about it more now. We don't have to wait for things to travel around. It's just because it's instant. And we're like, oh, we're the only ones who did this. No.
Yeah. So you wind up with the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and then those actually morph into actually they morphed into the Whigs,
Right.
and then the Federalists died out, and those ultimately in the 1820s, thanks to Andrew Jackson, became the Democrats, who are the Democrats we live with today.
Interesting. Yeah, Andrew
And
Jackson, huh? He was a real piece of work.
oh, he was he was a real piece of work.
Uh-huh.
We talk about Supreme Court situations these days. Andrew Jackson, there was a decision on the Supreme Court had made a decision indicating that the Indians, the Native Americans, were entitled to certain lands in Georgia, and Andrew Jackson simply said, "Well, John Marshall's made his decision. Now let's see him enforce it."
Yeah.
And he simply just ignored the
Ignored
Supreme
it.
Court, and started the whole situation with the Trail of Tears.
Yeah.
You know,
So many people don't realize that, like, that's where that story came from, of like big government basically, and government dissension.
yeah, and early on, other aspects of the government had in fact indicated that they're going to deal fairly with the Native Americans, but it was Andrew Jackson who actually started rounding them up and sending them out to reservations.
And then made a good deal of money off their land as well.
So, at any rate,
Yeah.
he founded what became the Democratic Party of today.
Okay.
And the Whigs wound up splitting over slavery, became a Northern Whig Party and a Southern Whig Party. And when Abraham Lincoln first was in Congress, he was elected as a Whig. And so when the Whigs started having these problems with Northern and Southern situations and issues, actually as much economic as slavery issues, but that's a whole separate discussion. We're talking about the evolution of parties at the moment, and so the Whigs started falling out of favor, and Lincoln was among the people that helped found the Republican Party in 1856, I believe, and they won their first national election out of the box in 1860.
So it's pretty good.
with Lincoln, and that's become the two parties that have existed. They had been dominating ever since.
So why we hear about other parties now and again? We've got the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, and why don't they get as much face time basically as these huge conglomerates so that we could morph it again?
The establishment has sometimes it appears as though there's really not even two parties. There's just the folks in charge.
Yeah. That's pretty much it where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's certainly in some respects much of the Illinois legislature. And what they've done is they've written the rules that makes competition very, very difficult. Short example: we have you've got a general election coming up in November, right? Here in Illinois, just like everywhere else, November 2018. To run in the general election in November of 2018, you have to file petitions to be on the ballot in December of 2017. Okay. Now, and then they have the primary elections in March, right? So who but a professional politician committed to a
lifetime career of it,
committed to an established party is going to know in December of 17 what the issues are going to be in November of 2018 that may motivate them to actually run for office. Right?
Yeah. A whole year before.
Nobody who is not committed to politics as a career even knows that that's when they're required to file. So if you miss the December deadline, you are not going to be on the ballot in November, because you're not even going to be on the ballot in March to be in. Even if you wanted to contest the establishment's choice of candidate, right? If you even
Right.
wanted to run in a Republican primary in March, you need to file in December. Are you thinking about that?
Yeah,
No, you're thinking about Christmas.
Right,
You're thinking about the end of the year. You're thinking about doing things to fix up your taxes for April. You
Yep.
know, to conclude, there are so many rules like that that exist that favor the established parties in ways that don't appear, they don't look like it on their face.
Yeah, they
You know,
appear real, non-meaningful, just
yeah,
arbitrary.
innocuous,
Yeah.
but they're there and constructed.
So
For
interesting that they would attack corporations and stuff for not, allowing enough competition, for, closing off industries and your entry levels into those industries and stuff, and then turn around and play all the same games themselves as far as getting different people into office. I mean, human
the
nature.
only right, yeah, that's exactly right. The only people that know that are people that are involved in established parties, right? And then, of course, they make it very, very difficult for a new party to be literally listed on the ballot, because you have to wind up. First of all, you have these huge hurdles of signatures to get on the ballot in the first place. If you're not there, even if you want to denote a party, and then you have to show that you had like 5% of the vote in the last election to be listed on the ballot, right? And if you don't get, and if you do that once, maybe there's something quirky happens. Maybe a Ralph Nader does really well, and your Green Party gets listed. Well, if you don't do as well as Ralph Nader did, then you're delisted. After that, okay. I'm just there's all kinds of rules that make the established parties, give the established parties a leg up, and they cooperated together to make these rules.
Well, of course they did, because it's beneficial to both of them,
Right.
There. Somebody. So what about the independent party? They're not even really a party like the independent people, and so how are they? How are they getting listed as like an independent on the ballot?
Those again, those laws vary from state to state.
Okay,
The rules on such a thing are vary from state to state, but it's generally speaking something like to get on the ballot to run in the primary for United States Senator as a Republican. I think you have to get here in Illinois like 25,000 signatures. Okay. To be listed on the general election ballot as an independent candidate for United States Senator, you have to get like 200,000.
Okay.
They make it possible, but there's just this tremendously huge stumbling block.
Well, with the increase of the independent party, do you see that as that's like the evolution of America, kind of rejecting the parties?
Well, they may be rejecting them at the moment, but why we survive with two major parties is that, generally speaking, if there's something that an independent or third party is doing or proposing that turns out to be extraordinarily popular, generally speaking, one of the two major parties takes up that cause.
They'll take them anyway. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they suck in those ideas that are the most popular and most beneficial to them. And since they have these great followings, at any rate, the people that had previously been following the independents find at least a temporary home with one of the major parties who
kind of like
co-opted.
The Tea Party system, as the Republicans kind of sucked them in, and then really none of their ideas were, utilized.
No,
they
agreed on their ideas. I don't know. Fortunately, there seems to be life in the Liberty Caucus, or the Freedom Caucus, the Freedom Caucus in the House. There seems to be about 40 members of Congress that have lived up to the promises, that hold out for things consistent with the ideas, but generally consistent with the ideas of the taxed enough already party, which is something that people don't recognize, that's where the Tea Party comes from. Is
pretty much.
Yeah, that is the original acronym. The
That's
tax
the
enough
name,
already.
right? Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. That's the
Oh,
original
okay.
acronym for tea. And
Right.
it
Even
happened to.
originally at the Tea Party?
No, well, no, you mean in Boston back in
Yeah.
1775? No.
Oh, man, that
I
would have
don't
been
think
really
that I don't
cool.
think they were big on acronyms.
It just works out conveniently that way.
Yeah, it worked out conveniently that
Okay,
way.
gotcha.
Those and you think about what I mean. It was a relatively minor tax on the tea. It was a small tax on legal documents involved in the Stamp Act, and of course those people were willing to die because they considered the imposition of that on them.
Well, yeah, what are
Akin,
we doing? We pay
it's
everything. We pay tax on like everything, triple time now.
oh, 7 cents on a plastic bag.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
going.
we can't even get them in California anymore. No plastic bags allowed. You can pay for a paper one if you want a bag. Yeah, and then our gas tax on top of DMV charges on top of, I mean, it's like really, the bloating has to stop.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I was lucky. My wife was born in Tennessee, and over Labor Day weekend, we went to a family reunion at hers, and we wound up spending some time in Nashville. And I, I saw freedom on the streets. I saw people singing and dancing, walking down the streets, happy. They had these moving bars that people pedaled.
Right?
They would pedal,
Nice.
and the bar would go around the thing, and they were serving beer. My wife said, "Wouldn't that be great if they had something like that in Chicago?" I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said they would want to card everybody that got on the bar. They got on there to pedal. They would want to get a license. They would want to tax everything. They would. I said, when we were walking around there, you heard the music coming out of the storefronts, and people were walking. And you got the sensation that as long as you didn't hurt anybody else, you do anything you want.
Right.
I said this feels like freedom.
Right.
It felt like freedom while we're in Nashville, and this is like 3 or 4 in the afternoon on Saturday afternoon. You know, and
Right.
you could and people all colors, all creeds, all one one bar we were in called Cerveza Jackson said, "Gracias, y'all come back now." You know, I mean, and I'm going, yeah, this is
what it's all about.
What it's supposed to be.
Right. When people can agree, when we can sit down and talk and agree on a set of rules and be like, okay, we can all go party in the patio as long as nobody picks on each other, hurts anybody, everybody can have fun.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you leave me alone, you leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone.
I'll leave you alone. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so somebody who's very constitutionally minded, I've been going round and round. I am part of the Libertarian Party. But the last election just really, I don't know, the presidential picks that they put up, I didn't have confidence in. They've just fell down the same road, I believe, that everybody else is on. Just to maybe be popular and try to get more votes, but it seemed to me like they just walked down the Washington highway instead of staying true to the libertarian principles. So, where would you recommend somebody very constitutionally minded goes, and then what's your opinion? I know, on the Libertarian Party.
The principles that are espoused, I've certainly been to a couple of libertarian conventions down in Florida, and actually a couple of years ago I spent some time with and visited with Gary Johnson. Think very very highly of Governor Johnson. I think it's a good place to go, but I think of course, unfortunately for them, in terms of being sucked to some place, the Republicans pick up their language. They don't necessarily pick up their policies. Mm-hmm. They do pick up their language. Although I have to say that if there's somebody so far that has been doing nothing, but I can't tell otherwise, but following to the best that he can the Constitution, is President Trump.
Fair enough.
And when we talk about parties these days are really tightly established, and they reflect the divisions that are we see in the media. I don't think we're as divided as the media pretends.
I don't disagree with that.
Nor as much as I'm pretty sure that those guys that have the competing press conferences on policy on the Capitol steps, when they get done, they go back and have a beer together while they're screaming at each other. But
as it should be in some ways. I mean, we have to have open debate, and it seems like it's discouraged.
But they don't have to scream.
Fair enough.
There's no reason to be
That's why I turn
uncivil.
off the media. Yep, that's why I turn off the news, because I don't want to listen to two people there screaming at each other on my screen.
Yeah. And I would have to say that if there's going to be another change in parties, it may very well be portended by the president, because he did something different in terms of divorcing his campaign of the social issues and concentrated on economic issues. And that was a sea change for what historically has been the case in the Republican Party since Richard Nixon.
Yeah, it was a smart move. It was a smart move. Because that's really what's relevant.
If there's somebody that you might argue is in fact an independent president, which is why nobody likes him, it's probably Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's not
That's
been,
Yep.
So we'll see. I can't say if he's successful. We'll see. He just turned the heat up on Congress.
He's got to have some time,
recently.
right?
He just turned it up on Congress recently in terms of the DACA, and said, the president doesn't have the power to do this. Yep. We can't defend it in court. It's not right. He took the right constitutional approach and said, we're gonna let it go because it's illegal.
Right.
And he's right. It's illegal.
Yep.
And unless Congress does something, so Congress, you go do something.
And they've done nothing. Oh my gosh, nothing.
They've done nothing forever. Everybody keeps saying they want to do that. They keep saying the whole repeal and replace, and then they don't do it. So he's saying, well, the Congress has no clothes, and they don't like him for it. So, I
wonder why.
but hopefully there'll be some more politicians that'll come around and do that. We dodged a bullet.
So, Dave, I really enjoyed talking with you today. Like I say, the Constitution is just something I wanted to get into. Two-party system is something we had to get into because it's just they've got us hook, line, and sinkered right now. So why don't you tell listeners where they can find out more about you, and let's see your books again, because I'm going to pick up that Constitution one. I like that for my sons.
That'd be wonderful. I think they'd appreciate and enjoy it. That's Constitutional Soundbites. It was my first book. There's 150 questions and answers on the founding documents, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and Bill of Rights. When I finished this one, I found there was 140 references to the Declaration of Independence, which made me consider and think that it deserves its own book. Yep. Creating the Declaration of Independence. Both of creating the Declaration of Independence and Constitutional Soundbites available on Amazon.com, both in print and Kindle. You can follow me at Twitter at Shestokas, SHESTOKAS, the common spelling, or my website. I've got about 180 articles on these documents.
Awesome.
Shestokas.com. So thanks so much, sir.
Thanks, Dave, so much for coming on and interviewing with me. The episode that we did on the Constitution was phenomenal, and then this one to back it up with the dangers of the two-party system and why some things exist and are going on. Well, we finished up a little early today, so I wanted to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about wild foraging. My reviews are kind of stagnant over there, so if you got a moment, you want to go throw a review over there on Amazon, we can go ahead and have another review time. But in the meantime, milkweed thistle has been coming up a lot in my research. And it's a plant that we have a ton of. So now there's definitely different types of thistles. They grow all over the place. So you want to find out what type you have growing. There's not too much difference in between them So it's kind of funny that they put them into all these different species because there's not really a whole lot of difference in between them. But what we have out here in the West is called milkweed thistle. And if you live out anywhere in the West, you're going to know this plant immediately because it invades everything that's been disturbed. So like roadways, pastures, yards, things like that. It just wants to grow in areas that humans have come into and cleared back for some reason. So it gets this really thick, spiky stalk, and it's super challenging to take down with the weed eater. And it's darn near impossible to mow. So you go, once it gets really tall and you put the mower blade up high in the air and try to, and it just kills it. So you cannot mow this stuff. And as you cut it with the weed eater, it sprays out this milky substance all over the place and you get all drenched from it. So, definitely a plant that we're familiar with because we do a lot of clearing it in the springtime when we have to get ready for wildfire protection. So first I thought this plant was a stinging nettle, and then I found out that it's not a stinging nettle. It actually looks a lot different from a stinging nettle. I was like, so we have so much of this plant. What can we actually do with it? What can we actually, I'm always wondering, what does it do? What does it, could it do for you? Can you eat it? That kind of thing. The food ran out. Everything's pretty much game, no matter how yucky it tastes. If you need nutrition. You need to know what's growing outside your door. And this is one of those plants that grows everywhere. It grows like crazy. So if you can eat it, cool. Let's put it on the diet list. I love this book. It's called The Edible and Medicinal Plants of the West. It's by Gregory L. Tilford. And he explains that the native peoples in North America used to treat liver disorders with this plant, and it is still used for that purpose today. They also used it for some other things, respiratory ailments, but it was for a different genus than what's growing out here. So if you have a different species of thistle where you're living, I'm sure you do, look it up, find out what can it do for you, and I'm sure you can eat it because there was nothing against eating any of the other species as well. So you can identify this plant. It's going to pick the heck out of you when you try and move through it. It's going to spike into you. You're going to know it's there. So you've got to wear protective clothing or use needle nose pliers when you're harvesting this plant. This plant can grow up to 7 feet tall in favorable conditions. It gets really, really big. And the milkweed thistle has a webbed pattern on the leaves, so you can easily identify it that way. It's a green leaf with a webbed white webbing on it. They're deeply lobed and grow in alternate patterns on the stem. The leaves are often spiny, and the stems can be up to 2 inches wide, and they sure can, and when you cut through them, they're hollow inside. The flowers vary depending on the species and can range from white to purple. They resemble a mini artichoke. This plant blooms in April through July. So it blooms a lot. It's a pretty little flower. Kind of, because it's all over this spiky thing that's a really big pain in the butt to take care of. Milkweed thistle is edible, but you should only eat it in small amounts. The flowers are edible, but the spines need to be removed before you eat them. And what you're eating in the flower is the fiber. They're actually 12% sugar. They're sticky and they're sweet to eat. The roots and leaves are also edible, but most varieties are bitter and remembered only when you need them for survival. So most of the varieties, when you eat the leaves or the roots, are kind of yucky. They're bitter, but if you had to eat, you had to eat. Some of them, though, highly taste like an artichoke. So you need to experiment with this. You need to find what thistle is growing near you, and then you need to look it up, and then you need to not eat it in large quantities, but start playing with it. See what it tastes like. So why you shouldn't eat it in large quantities is because some thistles contain carcinogenic alkaloids. So these are things that cause cancer. There's a lot of carcinogens in our world right now. So, you have to just weigh your options. We're going to go on and explain medicinally, but there's benefits that may outweigh the risks. And look at the medications that people are taking nowadays. You see the commercials where it's it's going to help with your hair quality, but it's going to mess you up in 18 other ways. So, I mean, there's always that kind of risk, right? So they're just saying don't have it for dinner every night. Don't develop a steady diet of milkweed thistle. Other uses, the dying flowers, they make excellent fire starters. So you can use them. You just have to get a flame onto them and they're going to start right up. They're this perfect little bundle of dry material in a nice little cup. Medicinally, the milkweed thistle has a tonic effect on the liver. So it is great for your liver. The active ingredient, silymarin, is found in the seeds. So you want the seeds. This chemical has been proven to strengthen, protect, and generate liver cells. So how do you know if you or your group member is suffering from a liver disorder? Common symptoms of liver disorder include frequent constipation, rapid mood swings. Now, that might be a tough one to judge in a long-term survival situation. I think everybody's going to have rapid mood swings. Menstrual disorders, red itching palms, small red abdominal spots, or sore itchy eyes. So again, I'm not medicinally trained in any way. I'm simply a student and I read and experiment with these, plants and these ancient herbal techniques because I believe in nature's medicine rather than, artificially creating active ingredients out of plants that have all these side effects. So I'm simply passing on the knowledge that I gained from studying the books and the internet and things like that I study on them. I basically take my notes. I write in a lot of notebooks, and I have one notebook that is entirely full of all the herbal research that I've done on all the different herbs. And every time I find it in a book, I'll, add a page about it to my notebook. So I basically just take stuff out of my master notebook, and that's what I use for my blog. So I'm just taking the information that I've learned and researched and then sharing it with you. But this is one I definitely wanted to present to you today because I know it's all over the place. Thistle is, an abundant plant, and you got to know, can I eat it or not, basically. That's, what I was after. Can I eat it or not? And then as a side bonus, it's got a medicinal benefit. So it's really good for the liver. So if somebody's in your group, they're having liver issues, it's definitely something that you're going to want them to ingest. And remember that the active ingredient is in the seeds. Great show today. Next week is the last episode of The Walls of Freedom. Last chapter, Dale and Lisa are going to be back with us. We did the final episode celebration together, just kind of got together and talked about, everything. So we talked about the book a little bit, and then we ran through like some of the basics and things, survival basics and things that we've been focusing on. So that's going to be a great show. Dave Shistoka's wealth of information. I mean, if you're interested in learning about your country, which you should be, we're all being ruled by these rules. So if you're interested in learning more, his books, you're definitely going to want to go pick them up. And then we talked about milkweed thistle, wild foraging, one of my favorite topics. So we're never going to go wrong there. So until next week, remember, dream, survive, thrive.
Thank you for joining Sara for this episode of the Changing Earth podcast. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Day After Disaster, Without Land, and The Walls of Freedom at www.author.sarafhathaway.com. If you love this podcast, please head on over to iTunes or Amazon.com and let everyone know by leaving a review.